Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the WarKat Show. I'm Neil Katz, a tech entrepreneur, and with me is once again Daniel Warfield, of course, data scientist, computer scientist, and a phenomenal writer and educator about the uses of generative AI. Daniel, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. And I heard we have a guest, which I'm very excited about.
We do have a guest. We're going to do things a little differently today. Normally, we're like deep diving generative AI. We're kind of getting very technical. We're going to step back a little bit today and get into, I think, one of the real powerful use cases of generative AI. And to help us talk about that, we have Eric Fong with us today, who is a trial lawyer who's been working really for, I would say, social justice. He typically picks cases where he feels he can bring some justice to bear. Usually, smaller parties fighting the government for their rights or for compensation or for other issues. He's going to explain all that to us, but he's working on some really important, powerful cases. I don't want to even preview because I want him to be able to tell us about it. But really interestingly, he started to use generative AI in his work, and he's going to talk about what he thinks the real potential is. And the reason I'm so excited about this today is because we talk about things that are kind of in the weeds, like, hey, you can use generative AI to draft some emails. You could use generative AI to produce this code. But using generative AI to fight for social justice or fight for the little guy against the big guys, that feels big. That feels really interesting. You don't hear about that a lot. And I think it's going to be really interesting today with Eric. Just a disclaimer that's important. Eric and his firm are using technology from the company that both Daniel and I work for, iLevel. But this is not going to be a sales pitch about the ins and outs of our technology. I really want to get into the law and how it's being used and the interesting things there. So without further ado, let's bring on Eric Fong. Eric, how are you?
Good morning. I'm excited. I'm doing good.
Well, great. Wonderful to have you here with us today. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your practice and the kind of cases you choose to take, the kind of battles you choose to fight, and how that works for you.
I've always had a pen, if that's the word, for the underdog. I started out my career as a public defender, and some of the craziest environments you could ever imagine. And I was really disgusted with how we as a community are treating each other. It didn't make sense to me that you get these people that are down and out and you punish them. And you take away what little hope they have by throwing them in jail, and you take away their job, you take away their license, you separate them from their family. And at the same time I was a public defender, I was starting a private practice as a personal injury lawyer. And I convinced my firm then to do some advertising to try and generate a civil practice where we basically fought the insurance industry to try and help people. And I found a lot of similarities between, the governmental approach to mass incarceration and corporate approach to making as much money as possible. And I developed a deep hatred for both of those aspects of our society and how we're evolving or maybe devolving. And so I have always been driven by a deep passion to help people, one person at a time. And if you get that right case, you actually can make a social impact because it transcends that individual, and it speaks to a greater desperate social
I gotta
need
ask,
that
man,
must
like
be
hearing you
fixed.
talk about law, we had a conversation a little bit before this, and we're having this conversation now. You talk about law in such a different and refreshing way than like anyone I've ever heard talk about law. I don't occupy law spaces, and I know the first thing you don't do is like make general claims about a space that you don't occupy, because I don't know anything about lawyers. I don't know anything about law. I've barely touched law, but the public perception is that it is a pretty cutthroat space, and it's like the public perception is that it's like there isn't a lot of care for people. And I'm curious, like I'm genuinely really curious, like how many lawyers are like you think, like where there's the individual who's like, man, this isn't good for people. Like, is this a growing movement in law? Do you feel like you're kind of alone on this, or is this like
I'm
a
not
general?
That's a great question. I'm not alone, but I'm definitely a minority. We are a minority because there's such a desperate need to make money. Things are always motivated by money, 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 money. And then it's an ego driven world as well, where people want to be that person. And so selfish interests take over the greater good. And the irony of all of this is that if you want to make money, give it away. If you want to have friends, be a friend. The spiritual concepts of generosity, altruism, is actually a selfish concept that is lost on most people. And so, first of all, thank you for that observation, because I think you might be right. I hope you are. But I'm not alone. I mean, some of the most courageous and generous people I know are lawyers. Lawyers are the people who took down the tobacco industry and exposed that fraud. Lawyers are the ones that have created some of the greatest social movements that we have to create equality, justice, and freedom for all, right? And so the profession is so noble, but where it gets into trouble is it's just littered with greed.
Mhm.
I mean, it sounds a lot like technology, man, right? Because it's like, and it's it it's the symptom of power, right? Like that's like if we're getting down to it, like that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about law. We're not talking about technology. We're talking about power, and power has all these interesting and subtle manifestations. Like the way I see technology, like we're getting into it. Right? The way I see technology is it's very much like an Icarus type of thing. You have the possibilities of the universe. You have the capabilities of man. You have like these high level abstract concepts of just, can we do things? And you're, as a technologist and as a researcher, you're plucking those out of existence and you're giving them to humans. And I just wrote an article on this. It's so hard to stay on the straight and noble path, because like, you create technology and then, people can use it for their own devices, and then they do. And I imagine the same thing happens in law. You create some sort of precedent, you create some sort of construct, and then different lawyers can use that for their own purposes, be them altruistic or otherwise. I feel like there's a big parallel between technical creation and legal precedent.
I'd go further and say it's everywhere, and the advances of what we're capable of doing within the mind is vast and unlimited. We can grow a brain in a petri dish. I mean, like we can create a matrix, implant it with stem cells or what have you, and grow a brain. And we're doing it with livers. The only question is, ethically, is that really something we should be doing or not? And so medicine, technical AI, legal stuff. We're hearing all over the news about a case that's pushing the legal boundaries of, is this possible or not? And I believe that it's in the risk taking of pushing the limits of what we think we can is where the growth will be. Where we get into trouble is that greed gets in the way of decision making. And you do something big, you have a target on your back and people want to take you down. And because there's this jealousy and there's this envy that we are cursed with. And I would say, on a side note, and I know that we want to talk about what you guys got going on, and so do I, that unless we as a community, whether it's AI, medicine, neighbors, all of us as a species, somehow fall back on a common ground that unites us, the chaos is going to take care of our problems for us. And I believe that the solution to a lot of this stuff is a journey. What's going to alleviate, what's the antidote to the greed, to the jealousy, to the suspicion, to I'm right, you're wrong? What's the antidote to that? And I don't, for me, all I can talk about is, for me, it was a spiritual journey.
Eric, can you take us a bit into the big case you're working on now in Alaska, which I think does touch on a lot of these themes of what's right and wrong and what's good and just, and then also, ways that new technology like generative AI can be used to try to bring some justice to people who need it.
Yeah, well, it touches upon what I was talking about earlier. And I look across the water and I'm looking at a city called Bremerton where I started out as a public defender. And I would go to the mayor and I'd go to this, I would show up at their offices. I'd set meetings up because I was the public defender in their courtroom. And I'd be like, why are we spending 80% of our local money on this? Police, jails, courts, probation officers. Like, look at the budgets of cities and see how much money we're plowing into the criminal justice system. And I'd say, well, why can't we redirect that money and just sit down with folks and read to them and their children and teach them and show them a better way and give them the tools that we were given as kind of privileged people and show them, because it's generational. People are falling behind at a clip that we're not able to keep up with. And so it's sucking us dry. Right. And I'm like, why don't we stop that now? And they would like laugh me out of the room. And what I saw in those jails was inhumane treatment of people, like good people who are suffering from mental illness. And they shouldn't be punished for behavior that, frankly, and the people who weren't suffering from mental illness, you get a DUI, you lose your job. Most people that I meet are not like hardcore criminals and recidivists that need to be like hammered so that the point is made. Give them the opportunity to prove that they're a good person and capable of growing from a mistake. And so I get a call from an Alaska law firm that has this case that involved an attempted suicide in a jail. And as a businessman, I can't take cases because I believe in a social cause. If I did that, if you give too much, you have not only are you not capable of giving, you yourself disappear. And so I can't just take a case because I love the issue. There has to be some ability to justify the risk, because I could lose $500,000 on any given case if it's not like if justice doesn't weigh in on my side, I'm out of business. And so it instantly caught my attention because of how deeply I believe in this issue. And by the way, I've had so many clients commit suicide. They will like smash themselves to the point of unconsciousness, and of course they'll hang themselves with points. And guess what the leading cause of death in jails is? It's suicide. And because of that, the law is based on duty, breach, causation. Do you have a duty to prevent a foreseeable bad outcome? And if you don't operate in an ordinary manner in the face of the danger, you're quote unquote negligent. And so every jail in the country will do a suicide risk screening on every single person that walks into those halls, those bars, those cells, because it happens all the time. It's like it's a crisis. And at the same time, the guards are being told and trained, we need to be aware of this. We need to focus on helping people, because that's what they will tell the public, right? The head of the Department of Corrections will talk about everyone's getting good medical care. We're here to help them so that when they get released, they go out into the world and they're able to do better. And the guards go through training and they are told this in messaging, but that messaging lasts an hour. And then there's no follow-up. There's no resources given to actually do what they say. And it's a big lie. It's not happening, right? It's a lie. And so nothing is ever being done about it. And so this poor kid, 20-something years old, never been in trouble in her life, and she's in the midst of an intense crisis. Like, she's completely psychotic. She got involved in a bad relationship, and she started using, like really scary stuff. And they recognize her at risk of suicide. They ask her point blank, are you, once you recognize that someone could do this act and it comes up in discussion in a jail setting, you have to send them to a mental health professional and assess their, do a basic psychiatric assessment to go through, any normal psychiatric exam to see if you're at risk of suicide. There's standardized testing for this stuff. They didn't do any of that. Instead, they punish her, and the officer actually writes suicide prevention protocol on a form, right? We got to take immediate protocol, which should be observation, put them in a suicide safe cell, do not give them a sheet and a place to hang yourself, right? In the meantime, she's completely decompensating. Like, her behavior is getting more and more alarming, and all the risk signs. I mean, they flat out admit it at suicide behavior that's really alarming. And what do? They give her 54 days of solitary confinement. They instead of helping a person who's mentally ill, they lock her up in a cell by herself with a sheet and an anchor point, knowing that she's at risk of hanging herself. And that's what happened.
Tell me more about what's happening inside this case, and then how you decided to start to try to use AI, and how you thought that might, bring justice faster or create some positive outcomes for this family.
It's a really, the social experiment of incarceration is unique to the United States. No other countries do it. And on the face of it, it's like a ridiculous case. Someone hangs themselves, they're strung out on drugs, they're whacked out. Why are you saying, how can you blame the Department of Corrections? They're just coming in on it on the end point of a complete crisis. They didn't start this, they didn't do it. And so on the face of it, if you don't know the insides, like, for 30 years, I've been really agonizing over this issue. It's very hard to grasp. Well, why is there a legal case at all? Because if I start out the story with, there's this tweaker, she's attacking her family, she gets arrested, and when she's in jail, she hangs herself, people would laugh you out of the room of like, and you're going to represent her for a case, right? And a lot of people are going to be inclined to believe that. And I respect that belief deeply. I understand it. There's a part of me that fully appreciates that line of thinking. However, right, there's something deeper going on that needs to be explored, and tough questions need to be asked. And when you're taking on something as elusive as suicide within the jail setting, it requires huge imagination to actually understand how this is possible and why it's preventable and why something wrong happened, that we can grow from it, and there needs to be accountability. And so cobbling that together as a lawyer is this is one of the most complicated cases I think that certainly I've ever dealt with, and I've got a lot of cases, complicated cases. And so the documentation of me getting to the point where I can like fully show to the community what's going on here and why this needs to stop now, because this could be anyone. This could be, and it is. I mean, good people are sucked into the system that shouldn't be. Is years of grinding out litigation and accumulating 20, 30,000 pages of documents that all are kind of like mysteriously put together by the other side because they're hiding stuff. Like, there's gamesmanship like you wouldn't believe. And so for you to process, and I could show you, I print everything off and I've got poster boards littered throughout my office. It would be, another time I'll show you what I'm talking about. But we're talking about, like, you could study this stuff for nonstop for years and you would be finding something new every day.
Yeah. So how do you dig through that? And Is that where AI has come in? Generative AI tools have started to change your practice or help you sort
Yes
through?
and no. Yes and no, because I have to have my fingerprints all over everything. Like, I'm the person who prints off every document and I just sit down and obsessively read it. Like, I'll just like sleep at the office and I will organize it and understand it and chart it out. But even at that, it's not enough. And so when I was introduced to AI, like, instantly playing around with this stuff, if you don't recognize the power of it, you're just in complete denial. You're in total denial if you don't sit down and play around with AI and appreciate the capacity to assist our intelligence and our thinking. And so, I took a leap and I purchased your product and started, plugging in and training the bot with all of these documents that we're talking about. And then I started asking it questions that I was struggling with. I had an idea, I had an intuition, and I'm sure they're all really good, but I was shocked at the different approach and how simple it made it, by the way. Like, the simplicity of the answers I got is astounding, that my mind can see really great valid things but completely overlook some of the most basic, simplest things.
Can you give an example? I know you want to give detail. You don't want to give specific details of the case that maybe you haven't cleared with your clients. But can you explain for people the kind of questions you're asking, the kind of answers you're getting, the kind of
Yeah.
insights or details that were kind of blew you away? That's why we're having this conversation. You said,
Yeah,
"Wow,
I
I
mean,
believe
there's
that."
one. I mean, it's so silly. This is an example, right? Their whole defense is, "Oh, we never could have seen this happen. Like, how could we have known? This is normal behavior in a jail. This setting is where we see this stuff all the time, and there's nothing we could have done. This is just normal behavior in the jail." And so for for a year and a half, I'm not joking. I obsessed over what's the antidote to that, because my approach to the law is to really understand the other side. Like, I live and breathe their arguments and I respect it and I'm afraid of it and I really want to understand it and give it life. And in that process, I can get around it and expose it, right? And I was really struggling with this question. It's like, well, I don't know. It's like I can point to the evidence that shows that this is outrageous statement, but then you're arguing and you're losing. And so I asked the bot from my level, I said, the Department of Corrections is going to say that da behavior was normal. They see it all the time, and they never could have anticipated it was suicidal. In what matter of seconds, it gives the answer that something to the effect of, this is not true. Their own policies and procedures describe this behavior as alarming and indicative of suicide. Like, and it's true, right? I mean, and it sounds silly saying that out loud because it's so simple, but I didn't get to that.
Wow. So part of the files you had uploaded, the case files you had uploaded, had these kind of rules and regulations of the penal system and how they view and treat and the kind of behavior required of them when dealing with this kind of mental illness or suicide risk. And it was able to pull out this idea that that this kind of behavior, it sounds like, is in their own manual.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
hadn't read their own manual, certainly weren't following it. And that insight, you felt like that was kind of magical coming from.
It was magical because how can you? I mean, the gravitas to say that this behavior is normal and we never could have foreseen it, and at the same time, you have a policy and procedure that you're training your people on to say, if you see this behavior, they need to be put in suicide prevention protocol. The gravitas to make that argument, and I would say it's a lie, is outrageous, right? But they say these things because it latches on to a belief that people have, a bias, a preconceived notion that isn't necessarily true, but when you hear it, it's like, oh, that makes sense.
This conversation is absolutely surreal as a data scientist, because it's what you're talking about is a textbook example of, well, so it's what our company does. Again, this isn't an ad for the company. It's a technology, and it's called retrieval augmented generation. It's an emerging paradigm for the usage of AI models. And basically, the idea is you build a system that, given a question, can retrieve information. There's all sorts of technical, magic about how that happens, but basically, you give a system a question, and this little bot, it looks at a bunch of documents and it goes, hey, this chunk of this document, this is relevant to your question. This chunk of this document is relevant to your question. Then you basically aggregate those. You have, hey, this is my question, and this is all these chunks that are relevant to the question. Let's give it to a language model and see what it says. And this is totally this is just the theoretical idea. This is the theoretical implementation. And it's wild because the classic example is like, you're a company and someone has some esoteric question, so you want to find a specific answer, or whatever. But this idea of, they are saying this thing, what things did they say that are relevant to this thing? Can you give me a breakdown of the answers? Like, just the continuum of, like, it's a relatively simple concept, but it has such major and intense implications. You as a lawyer can now dig through hundreds of thousands of pages of documents and ask a specific question and get a tailored answer, which is bonkers.
And part of part of like what makes us beautiful and just confounding all at once is that our emotions can cause us to see things in a way that's distorted. And so our logic, we were talking earlier about logic and emotion, and sometimes our emotion can filter and bias information so that we're not really clearly seeing it. And if you're not able to just kind of clearly step back and just analytically go through this stuff, you're going to miss many of the messages. And not that we shouldn't use emotion to gauge information and form a response, but what blew me away is just the sheer logic of AI really helps me as kind of maybe a bigger seeing person who gets frustrated with logic and attention and detail. Right. So, I mean, it is mind-boggling, the potential for the legal community, in the hands of qualified lawyers, what we can do with this stuff. I mean, it's really exciting.
So there's a couple things that are bouncing around, and I think we're wrapping up pretty soon. But there's a couple ideas that I think have been bouncing that are just resonating with me really hard. One, this idea of like the man against the machine, right? You're dealing with, you're an individual person with an individual care. You have something that really resonates with you, and these people in these institutions, they're not bad people, right?
No.
And that's what's scary about it. That's really what's scary, that a lot of people can work together doing the best that they can. They're feeding their kids, all that stuff, but it abstracts away the individual agency, and it allows for these types of things to happen. And I think a lot of people look at AI and they say like, oh, it's going to replace people. I personally don't think that's anytime nearly soon. It's not powerful enough a technology, but what it can do is it can allow individuals to do more. And that means you don't need to have these large organizations where individual agency then becomes abstracted across this large organization. You can have individuals who care about something, and they can pursue something, and they can accomplish something. And I think that's really, for me, the big takeaway. And I won't get into it, but there's this amazing book that's hard to read called Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. And he talks about the will to power. And the will to power, people are afraid of people that are powerful, right? Kind of like we've seen it, we've been hurt by people that are powerful. They impose their will on us. But the way you fight back at that is you have some vision of the world, and you become powerful, and you change the world in a positive way. And I think AI is really a multiplicative factor. If you're a bad guy, you can use AI probably to hurt people. But also, like, the big takeaway that people don't talk about as often is, if you're a good guy and you have a good will, you want to change the world in a positive way, you can use AI as a multiplicative factor to enable and enact your vision of the world. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's kind of like money, you win the lottery. If you're in a good, healthy state, you're going to use that money to do good things. If you're in a bad, if you're not, it's going to destroy you and everyone around you. And I think I think you're exactly right. And we're kind of back to this idea of what do we need to be doing as a community to make the world a better place, and how can we use this technology? And I have nothing but optimism and hope. I mean, there, I am, and the irony of this is that I'm the last person in the world that would buy into technology. Like, I'm not that person. I don't do PowerPoints. I just stumbled upon.
You're missing out. They're fantastic.
That.
You're missing out. Doing PowerPoints is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
A whole big piece of the world you're just missing out on.
I know. I know. And that's, people absorb information differently. But here's what I'd say, here's kind of, not to get off point, but when you get tied into PowerPoint, you get tied to a script or that PowerPoint as opposed to what is going on in the moment in the communication with people. And you get more locked into the message you want to say as opposed to what needs to be said so that you're meeting people where they are.
Sure.
Right? And so that's the balance. That's the balance.
So you've started, now you've got some experience. You're playing with generative AI in a real way to bring about real change in a real case. Where do you think this takes us? Do you have a feeling for like what your practice or your industry, the future of law, is like? Good, and it could be bad too. Nothing's perfect.
I really, I do and I don't. I mean, of course, it's all new, and there's things that need to be ironed out and figured out, and that's always the case. But I think now in its infancy, we're on the cutting edge of just diving into it. At least the legal profession is, and as AI people learn about the legal profession or whatever sub niche you're catering to, there's got to be a bridging of knowledge so that people are meeting each other with the needs and the capabilities, and it's a teamwork. But I think with the law, someone like me is safe. A trial lawyer that has to talk to people is never going to be at risk. I mean, we're in such desperate need to have a lawyer that's willing to go to court and not just cave and accept whatever offer comes up. There needs to be some courage and the ability to go into court. And AI is never going to do that. We're not going to have robots getting up in front of a jury. However, I think that much of the law is really rote and repetitive. Like I don't know how a lot of lawyers are able to engage in their job because it's so repetitive and just plugging in data that, when you talk about the bean counters that want to get efficient, I'd be, if you're someone that's just entering data, I think that AI could displace you. And I think that if you're someone like me, leveling the playing field and using it to augment and help, your individuality and your unique perspective of the humanity of helping people, right? That we talked about earlier, Daniel, it's like on steroids. It's explosive. The ability for someone like me to go out and do good and help my clients with the help of AI is riveting. Like, it gives me the chills.
And is it really anything new? Like, man, I don't like computers. I prefer my typewriter. Like, what is this newfangled BS? Like it's like we talk about AI and it's like there's that classic phrase like you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you're going to be replaced by someone who uses AI. Like, and it's like it's kind of jarring, but it's any new technology. It's a powerful technology, and it's the modern computer.
It's an advancement. It's the industrial. It's the next revolution. And people who get displaced are not going away. They need to grow from that crisis, like my crises, and find some new imagination and creativity that makes you better. Do something more meaningful, more important, something that matters. Right? That's what we're missing: our beliefs and passions and things that matter. And the stuff right now of what AI is doing, frankly, I question, like the people that get stuck in filling in information of where we are right now. And is that information really making the world a better place? Maybe you should be doing something that's more poetic and deeper and more powerful.
Well, beautifully said. I think it's a great coda to end this episode. We really appreciate coming on, Eric, and talking about
Well, you're welcome, but thank you
issues that are
for.
really fascinating that we don't.
Well, it is. I mean, I mean, there's no doubt about it. This stuff is like, what a great conversation. But thank you for using and being at the forefront of what is now like our reality, and doing it for good.